tutorial starts with a song, but it's only a few seconds long.
Computer animation. Computer animation. Computer animation.
Let's get started with animation. Hello friends, a while ago I did this tutorial. I was creating a mesh network from NURBS circles basically, and I used them for creating quite a complex window. We scroll to the end, the window is now in the wall, and here we do some rendering, and now we get a better shadow here, and quite an amazing technique really, which I didn't invent, I just made a tutorial about it. And today I want to show you a similar strategy without using mesh and without using single geometry. We'll use a blobby surface. What is a blobby surface? The term blobby surface has been around, well, blobby particle has been around in Maya for ages, and it's still usable. So let's create any kind of geometry. I choose the standard plane here, and I go to polyplane and I change the settings just a little bit to, I don't know why, just for the purpose of visualization. Now we go to FX here, and then under nParticles you can create a soft body. Make sure that under the soft body options you have set everything back to defaults. You do this by clicking here, reset the settings, and apply it with this selected. Then you can close it. And now you see it is already a soft body, although when you run the simulation nothing happens. You need special forces in the world or move the original object or whatever, but we're not interested in that because we want to just exploit the texture. Now the particles are the little dots here, 10 by 12, because I created the plane in such a matter. So every CV, we would call them in the NURBS world, every cross point here, we have a particle, which is a tiny white dot. Now when we open this section here, we see the particle, and in the attribute editor you see the particle shape. And let me close all the sections here so you see things fresh from the start really. You have the amount of particles here, it's 153, and you have a lifespan. Doesn't matter for us. Interesting is the particle size, and we'll come back to this later, because when we change the size now we see nothing happening because the dots are infinitely small. So what we need to do is we go to the shading section, and usually, if you've watched other tutorials I usually go from points to spheres, and the spheres are very big because of this. So I go back to the size. 0.1 makes the things a little bit more attractive. But today I want to, actually we can render this, so I show you the impression of, let's create a sky dome light, and I go to Arnold here and I render this. So this is what we get. All the spheres are here quite distinctively, and well, okay, back to the particle. I want it to be not displayed, the render type as it's called, as spheres, but as blobby surface. And blobby, you see, S/W, that means software. It comes from the old days when Maya was the only renderer, the Maya renderer here, and this means that you could not display it in the viewport, but you had to render it using the Maya renderer. But we can use the Arnold renderer as well. So let's choose a blobby surface now, and we get this representation here. And now we go back up here to the radius, and we reduce this quite drastically to 0.1, and then the dots are quite well visible here, but maybe a little bit too small, so let's raise this to 5, that's too much already. We need to find a value in between, but 3 is quite good and 4 is even better. And with 4 you have them mix with each other and holes in between them. And this is quite a nice structure. And if we want to look through this blobby surface, we need to hide the plane, the original soft body plane here, which sits in the center of that object. Where is that plane here? I can't find it. I can find that group here. When I hide the group H, everything goes away. It's only hidden. So you can press Z in order to undo it anyway. No, you need to right mouse click here and show or display the shapes. And the shapes show you a little bit more. For example, for the perspective camera, you actually see that camera shape now here appear in the outliner. But we need to open the polyplane section, and here we have two things now. Previously we only saw the particle, and now we see the shape, and that's exactly what we want to hide. So we press H now, and we can look through our blobby surface. And what we can do now as well is we select it, right mouse click, and create a new material, an Arnold standard surface shader, which turns out white here in the display of in the rendering display. And of course we can use one of the presets, for example, well, copper, for example. Can this actually make interesting effects with lights? Absolutely. Just select it, move it up a little bit like this, and create an object below. Actually, the brown is quite a horrible color. This looks good. And now we'll create a light which shines through that object in order to check out whether it's really casting a proper shadow. It is already casting a shadow from the sky dome light, which is a diffuse shadow, very elegant really, but it of course does not respect the holes in there because it's just too blurred. Maybe when I move it further down, the shadow gets more interesting. It sure does. It shows some kind of structure. But in order to get this really nice, this effect of the light shining through the holes here, you need another kind of light, for example an area light, which arrives in the scene quite big. It shines in this direction here. You see that line, that green line here, and we want to tilt it so it affects our structure here. Now we'll reduce the sky dome light. Actually, we can right mouse click and disable the shape here, so we get a leaner layout here. We're back to the area light, and we uncheck normalize. We go to the dome light and reduce the intensity to a very small one, like 0.1. So we have basically the effect of the area light. We go back to the area light now, and we make the intensity higher, intensity or exposure. Both values are interesting. And now we go a little bit closer. And what we see now here is the structure is still blurred because it's a natural effect. The light is not a laser light, it's an area light which has a diffuse factor. But if we want it to represent the holes in here more precisely, we can reduce the spread here. It's currently set to 1, so it spreads the shadow quite a bit. And when we reduce it, you see that the structure is appearing in the shadow. And if we reduce it even further, that shadow becomes sharper and sharper. And when you reduce it to 0, you have a 100% sharp shadow, which is totally unnatural. So let's raise this to at least 0.01 or something like that, or 0.05. Of course, since this is a soft body, you have all ways to animate this with gravity or with turbulence fields or whatever, or deformations. So this blobby structure doesn't have to be straight as it is now. I just wanted to show you that it still exists and it renders all right in Arnold, and it's quite an interesting structure. When you go back to the plane particle here and reduce the radius to 0.3, for example, you get these dots here and the shadows appropriately. But for 3.5, for example, gives you something in between what we just saw and what will render now. So this is where we came from, 0.04 in this case. Yet another thing, since particles are so flexible and you can use dynamic forces which work on them, in unpredictable or more or less unpredictable ways, always interesting results. I tried this. You see the basic setup. It's shaking because of a sine function and a turbulence field, and a second turbulence field which you see moving here in as a green dot, and it takes the grid apart. I also animated just a little bit the size of the particles, so they glue to each other more or less at the beginning, and then they kind of get away from each other. Let's render, for example, this part here. I won't wait until the rendering is done. Let's get it a little bit forward in the scene. And now the main turbulence field walks down, moves down to the bottom, and leaves basically the whole structure alone. So it just slightly extends while shaking all the time. Let's render this. The background image is from the Skydome light, which I mapped with an HDRI image. Well, have a nice day and bye-bye.